Now, we've seen these drone attacks overnight from Iran on Israel. Was this expected? Could this turn into a broader Middle East conflict, or can it be contained? And was this something you discussed with US officials on your trip last week to Washington?
Well, regional escalation of the current Middle East conflict is something that, quite frankly, the whole world has feared since the beginning of the conflict. Iran has been a malign actor in the region for a long, long time, and we condemn their attacks. And it's very important that we provide that international pressure to ensure that escalation does not occur. For Australians in that region, particularly Australians in Tel Aviv, Amman or Baghdad, we urge them to follow the advice of the local authorities and shelter in place, and for any Australians worried to contact the consular emergency hotline. But as I said at the start, Iran has been a malign actor for a long time in the region. We condemn their attacks, and we urge de-escalation of the conflict. It is in no one's interest for this conflict to escalate beyond where it is now.
Is this, the US and the UK appear to be providing military assistance to Israel. Is there any consideration of that from Australia's part?
Well, we've been focused on supporting the efforts of allies and like-minded partners to prevent escalation of the conflict. That's why we've supported personnel and resources into the maritime headquarters, as well as the US efforts to counter the attacks by Houthi rebels out of Yemen into the Red Sea. That's our level of involvement at the moment. But we urge Iran to take a step back. They have an opportunity to reverse their course of being a malign actor in this region, and we certainly will be applying all diplomatic pressure to that end.
Because Penny Wong did speak to her Iranian counterpart the other day, didn't she? The Foreign Minister has certainly faced some criticism for her speech where she talked about a Palestinian state as a way out of this. Can you understand why some in the Jewish community would be upset about that, that it could look like the October 7 attacks are being rewarded?
Well, I urge everyone to read Penny's speech. It was incredibly well balanced. It was a speech that reflected the long-term policy of governments of both persuasions. Penny made a number of points. First, that we were calling for immediate humanitarian ceasefire that involved the immediate freeing of all hostages and urgent humanitarian assistance to be provided to the region. That was Penny's first point. But then she made a broader point that we need to break through this cycle of endless violence, and part of that pathway is a two-state solution where Israel is securing its borders and recognised by its neighbours, and that there is a Palestinian state. This is the reflection of the Oslo Accords. It's been the policy of both Labor and Liberal governments for a long time to support a two-state solution, and it's perfectly aligned with the rhetoric and policies of other like-minded countries. UK's Foreign Secretary David Cameron has said things very similar. And importantly, to make this point, this is in the interest of Israel. Israel can only have security from its neighbours when they recognise its right to existence. And Saudi Arabia, for example, has said that it won't recognise Israel until there is a two-state solution.
Is there really a hope, though, that the people of Gaza would disassociate themselves from Hamas?
Well, we made it very clear, as has the world community, that a two-state solution must exclude Hamas. Part of the two-state solution is a Palestinian state recognising the borders and the right of Israel to exist. And Hamas cannot be part of that. They just cannot, and that's been the policy of the Australian government.
We've seen a former Chief of the Defence Force, Mark Binskin, appointed as a special advisor on this incident involving the death of Zomi Frankham. Do you believe Mr Binskin will get to go to Israel or get the Israeli information around the attack? Seems some real doubts about that. I've heard he does have contacts in the Israeli Defence Force, though. Are they helping him?
Well, we made it very clear that we expect the Israeli government to engage with retired Air Chief Marshal Mark Binskin as he conducts his activities. We made it very clear from day one, from the tragic attacks on the World Central Kitchen convoy and loss of life, including Zombie Frankham, that Australians expect full accountability and a transparent investigation. And the briefings that have been provided so far do not meet that criteria. And that's why Mark Binskin's appointment is critical. And that's why the Israeli government engaging with Air Chief Marshal Binskin is critical, to give that accountability and give that transparency that, quite frankly, every Australian deserves.
A big announcement this week in terms of a new Australian Defence Force chief in David Johnston. It was always tipped to be a naval type because of the way defence is heading, our defence, but many thought it might be the Chief of Navy, Mark Hammond. Why did you go for Mr Johnston, and why only 2 years for his appointment? It's being billed as something of a stopgap measure.
Well, I've worked closely with David Johnston for the last 2 years, and he is a ADF officer of the highest character who's held some of the toughest jobs in the Australian Defence Force for a long, long time, including Chief of Joint Operations and Vice Chief of the Defence Force. And he is a fine appointment, and he has done a ton of work over the last couple of years around implementing the Defence Strategic Review, working on the National Defence Strategy and the Integrated Investment Program, which is the 20-year equipment acquisition plan. The reason for a 2-year appointment is to align it with the rest of the appointment cycle for senior ADF officers. When we came to government, the decision from Prime Minister Albanese and the DPM Richard Marles, supported by people like me, is that we wanted to extend the terms of Angus Campbell as Chief of Defence Force and David Johnston as Vice Chief of Defence Force for 2 years to maintain continuity and allow that leadership to support the design and implementation of the Defence Strategic Review. And that's why, as a consequence of that, there is a 2-year appointment cycle now for currently Vice Admiral David Johnston. But he's one of the smartest thinkers in the ADF. He's a man of the highest character, and his appointment has been universally welcomed within the ADF.
Might he be extended then, briefly? Past the 2 years?
Look, I'm not going to speculate into that. David's been in some of the highest pressure jobs for a long, long time. So the Prime Minister will make that decision when we come up to that 2-year cycle, where obviously we'll look at the senior appointments throughout the ADF. So I'm not ruling anything in or out.
Pat Conroy, almost out of time. Just let me ask you briefly, you were just in the US. What was the reception like in terms of AUKUS, particularly from the Republican congressman? Do you have a belief Donald Trump would continue with the project if elected?
Well, it's full steam ahead for AUKUS. This is in the strategic interests of all three nations, and it will outlast changes of government in all three countries. We've already had a change of government in Australia, and AUKUS, if anything, has strengthened. I was in the US Senate gallery in December for the critical votes around the transfer of the Virginia-class submarines to Australia, and that got an 80% vote yes in the Senate and 75% vote in the House of Representatives. This is in the interest of the United States, it's the interest of Australia and the interest of the United Kingdom for us to acquire the most advanced submarines in the world that will be fully commanded and controlled by the Australian government, and there's strong Republican support for this initiative.
Pat Conroy, thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks, Andrew.